So I'm just going to make a quick video. I'm only going to go over one question from each section, but I'll make a quick video. If you have any questions, just make sure you reach out. All right, so the first one I'm going to go through is number 1, and we have a triangle here. And for this one, it says solve for x, or find the missing side of each triangle, so solve for x, and round to the nearest tenth if necessary. All right, so this is what your triangle was given. So they tell us that it is a right triangle. They tell us this by this angle here. So that lets me know that a squared plus b squared is equal to c squared. Now remember, the only letter that truly really matters that you're making sure that it only has one possible number that you can plug in for, and that is a c. And c is your hypotenuse. It's the opposite of your 90-degree angle. So that means I need to make sure I substitute 10 in for c. All right, for the other ones, A and B, they represent our legs, and our legs are just the other sides of our triangles, the two sides that come together and make up our 90-degree angle. So it doesn't matter if you substitute 6 in for A or if you substitute it in for B, it'll give you the exact same value or the exact same answer. All right, so now 6 squared is 36. So we get 36 plus x squared is equal to 100. We now want to go ahead and solve for our x squared, so we need to subtract over 36. So then we will get x squared is equal to 64. Then we need to take the square root of each side so we can solve for the x. Now remember, algebraically, I want you guys to not get into any bad habits. So algebraically, a number squared equal to 64, that will generate two answers, a plus and a minus. And the square root of 64 is 8. But since we're dealing with the side of a triangle or length, we need to reject the negative because we can't have a negative length. So our answer is just x is equal to a positive 8. And make sure you write the correct units, kilometer. If you do not write plus or minus, you will lose points, right? Because I don't want you guys to get into bad habits. I want you to answer everything correctly algebraically. And then you will say, well, we can't have a negative because we're dealing with the length of a triangle, the side of a triangle, so length. So we need to reject the negative, and our only answer is the positive 8. All right, so that's the only question I'm going through in that section. Now let's move on to the next one. All right, so the next one, it says find the missing length, so it's the same thing. And I'm going to do number 5. Number 5 has a triangle here. We are given a right angle. We have x. We have the square root of 5 yards. And we have the 2 times the square root of 3 yards. So we're asked to solve for x. So we have a right triangle, so we know a squared plus b squared is going to be equal to c squared. Remember, c is the one that we need to make sure we're substituting in properly. The a and b, we can substitute either leg in for either one. C is the opposite of a 90-degree angle, so it's this entire 2 times the square root of 3. So make sure you're putting this in parentheses. Without putting it in parentheses, you may get this wrong, as some of you were doing during class. So then we substitute the x in for A, and we substitute the square root of 5 in for B. And if you substitute the square root of 5 in for A, it wouldn't matter. X squared is still x squared. The square root of 5 squared is now 5. And here we need to distribute this power to both the 2 and the root 3. So 2 squared is 4, and the square root of 3 squared is 3. And we're multiplying them here, so we need to multiply, so it's equal to 12. All right, then we will subtract over the 5. So now we will get x squared is equal to 7. Then we take the square root of each side. And remember, we must put plus or minus because we need to make sure we're staying in good habits. Since we're dealing with the side of a triangle, it cannot be a negative length, so we reject it. We cannot reduce the square root of 7 at all, so we will just say the square root of 7 and make sure you're putting the right units. Had this question said to round to the nearest tenth, then you would just need to make sure that you're plugging this into your calculator, and you would do the square root of 7, which is then equal to 2.64, and 2.64, if we're rounding to the nearest tenth, since this is less than 5, it will remain 2.6. So I know the question here did not ask you to round to the nearest tenth, but if it did, just make sure that you know how to round. All right, now let's move on to the next section. All right, so for the next section, it's just saying state if each triangle is a right triangle. Right? So we're just saying, is this a right triangle? So let's go ahead and let's pick number 11. So for number 11, we have this triangle here. We're given the square root of 101. We're given the square root of 37. And we're given 8 kilometers. So these are all kilometers. All right, so before you get started, if we're asked to state, is this a right triangle? Remember I said that you should now start writing your c squared first. And we're asking, is c squared equal to a squared plus b squared? So now what we need to do is, our c is, we don't know our right angle like we did in these other ones. So we can't just say, oh, this is our c or this is our c like we did before, because we don't know our right angle. So when we don't know the right angle, the way that we can pick out our c is it must be the largest side if it's going to be anything. So this side is 8. This side, the square root of 101 will maybe be 10.1. The square root of 37 might be 6.1. I'm just approximating those. Let me see what they actually are. So the square root of 101 is 10.04, and the square root of 37 is 6.1. So we will look and say, well, the largest side here would have to be that 10. So when we substitute it in, make sure you substitute in the exact value. So we're going to substitute in the radicals and not the decimals. The decimals just allow us to say, well, which one will be our c? So in this case, this one, if anything, would have to be our c. So we need to make sure we're substituting it into the correct number. So if you can't, so just by looking at these, make sure you're taking the square roots to see what is this actual value. The other two, it doesn't matter which one you substitute in for a or b, so we're just going to go ahead and substitute them in. Then we will solve. Well, the square root of 101 squared is 101. This will give us 37, and this is 64. 37 plus 64 is equal to 101. So when they are equal to each other, this is a right triangle. All right. If they're not equal and it's just saying, is it a right triangle and not acute or obtuse, then you will just say no. But in this case, it is a right triangle. All right, 2 more questions and that's it for this video. All right, the next section says, state if the triangle is acute, obtuse, or right. So it's very similar to what we just did in that last question, but now if it's not equal, we wouldn't just say, no, it's not right. We will say, if it's not equal, is it obtuse or is it acute? And remember, acute, our hypotenuse is going to be less than our a squared plus our b squared. And an obtuse, our hypotenuse will be greater than our a squared plus our b squared. And if it's right, as we've already done before, our c squared is equal to our a squared plus our b squared. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and pick one question, and I will pick 15. All right, so 15, you are given this triangle here. So we have 5 times the square root of 7 kilometers. We have 7 kilometers, and we have 16 kilometers. All right, remember, since we're not told that it's a right triangle and we're solving for this, we do need to make sure that we are choosing the correct side that is our largest side. So you should plug in that 5 times the square root of 7 into your calculator just to see what value this is. And when you plug this in, it gives you a value of 13.2. So now we can look and say, well, which side is our largest side? So that would then be the 16. So this is our largest side. Remember, we're not going to use this in our calculations, but it allows us to determine which one is our largest side. So now we're plugging it into, is c squared? I'm going to leave a little box here, a little space for us to fill in. Is it equal to? Is it less than? Is it greater than? A squared plus b squared. So this 16 will be our c squared. Our a squared is this whole 5 times the square root of 7. And our b is this 7. We will distribute this in. So this will give us a 25. And the square root of 7 squared is 7. And 25 times 7 is 175. 16 squared is going to be 256. And 7 squared, I'm sorry, this should have been squared, is equal to 49. All right? 175 plus 49 is going to give me 224. And 224 is a 256. Well, in this case, our c squared is greater than, so our c squared is greater than our a squared plus our b squared. So when our c squared is greater than, we would say that this is obtuse. So it is an obtuse triangle. If this were to be less than, then it would have been an acute triangle. If it was equal to, it would have been a right triangle. All right, so that is it for this section. There's one more, and then we're done with this problem. So let me just go ahead and I'm just going to push this up a little bit. All right, so this last section, you might be given a triangle, something that looks like this. Let me redraw this. You might be given something that looks like this. Right, go by the information provided, not how it looks. And I might give you, let's just do the one I did in class. So if I said that this is equal to x, this is 4, this is 5. I'll make different numbers for this one. So let's just say this is 10, and let's say this is 14. All right, so then if we wanted to go ahead, let's say that this is not 10, let's say that this is 7, and let's say that this is 9. All right, so I'm sorry, not 9, y. All right, so then if we want to go ahead and solve for this, we have two triangles. We have this triangle here, and we have this triangle that's here. So if we go to try and set up our equation for each, the first one, we would get opposite of our 90 degrees is y, so we would get 7 squared plus x squared is equal to y squared. We can't solve this because we have two unknowns. But in this one, opposite of 90 degrees is 5, and we could get x squared plus 4 squared is equal to 5 squared. So in this case, we only have one unknown, so we can solve this. X squared plus 16 is equal to 25. We subtract the 16. So x squared is then equal to 9. We take the square root of each side. Since we're dealing with our a number squared is equal to 9, it will give us a plus or minus in return. So the square root of 9 is 3. We reject the negative because we're only dealing with positive side lengths because it's distance, so our x is equal to 3. We can now substitute this 3 in for our x here. So we would then get 7 squared plus 3 squared is equal to y squared. So 49 plus 9 is equal to y squared. Y squared is equal to 58. You would then take the square root of each side, so y is then equal to plus or minus square root of 58. We reject the negative, so y is then equal to square root of 58. And then, depending on what the question wanted, you can then either reduce it to see if there's any number that we can divide into here that is a perfect square. It doesn't seem like there are any that will divide into this. So I think this is the simplest form. So let's just make sure. So it'll be 2, that'll be 29. Yeah, there's no other term. So yeah, so that is our simplest radical form. Or if we ask you to do this and round it instead of simplest radical form, you would then just take the square root of 58, and that will give you 7.6. So y is then equal to 7.6. So if I asked you to round it to the 10th, you would round it here. If not, your final answers would be y is equal to square root of 58 and x is equal to 30. All right, that is it for this video. Please make sure you do that worksheet so you're ready for the test.